Hello! It is Storytime with Uncle Scotty. I am your host, Uncle Scotty. We have our own mugs. Last week, we were reading Mr. Popper's Penguins. Today, we're continuing what we were doing yesterday, which is our new book, Pippi Longstocking. And oh my goodness gracious, isn't Pippi Longstocking such a fascinating little character? Young woman living in a house all by herself, with a monkey who wears a suit and a horse who lives on a porch horse. She can cook pancakes, like incredibly, seems to do things very interestingly, has wonderful stories from places all around the world. And her new friends, Tommy and Annika, who live next door, are just having a blast getting to know her. They may be a little confused, a little vexed. But let's find out what happens next. Chapter 2. Pippi is a thing finder and gets into a fight. Annika woke up early the next morning. She jumped out of bed and ran over to Tommy. "Wake up, Tommy," she cried, pulling him by the arm. "Wake up! Let's go see that funny girl again with the big shoes." Tommy was wide awake in an instant. "I knew, even while I was sleeping, that something exciting was going to happen today, but I didn't remember what it was," he said as he yanked off his pajama jacket. "Pajama jacket? Tommy! Who wears a pajama jacket?" Off they went into the bathroom, washed themselves, and brushed their teeth much faster than usual. Done. Had their clothes on in a twinkling. And a whole hour before their mother expected them, came sliding down the banister, which is like the staircase rail, sliding down the banister and landed at the breakfast table. Down they sat and announced that they wanted their hot chocolate right at that very moment. "What's going to happen today that you're in such a hurry?" asked their mother. "We're going to see the new girl next door," said Tommy. "We may stay all day," said Annika. That morning, Pippi was busy making a peppercakor, a kind of Swedish cookie. She had made an enormous amount of dough and rolled it out on the kitchen floor. "Because," Pippi said to her little monkey, "what earthly use is a baking board when one plans to make at least 500 cookies?" And there she lay on the floor, cutting out cookie hearts for dear life. "Stop climbing around in the dough, Mr. Nilsson," she said crossly just as the doorbell rang. Ding dong. Pippi ran and opened the door. She was white as a miller from top to toe, and when she shook hands heartily with Tommy and Annika, a whole cloud of flour blew over them. "So nice you called," she said, and shook her apron. So there came another cloud of flour. And Tommy and Annika got so much in their throats that they could not help coughing. "What are you doing?" said Tommy. "Well, if I say that I'm sweeping the chimney, you won't believe me. You're so clever," said Pippi. "Fact is, I'm baking. But I'll soon be done. You can sit on the wood box for a while." Pippi could work fast, she could. Tommy and Annika sat and watched how she went through the dough, how she threw the cookies onto the cookie pans, and swung the pans into the oven. They thought it was as good as a circus. "Done!" Pippi said at last, and shut the oven door with the last pans with a bang. Bang! "What are we going to do now?" asked Tommy. "I don't know what you're going to do," said Pippi, "but I know I can't lie around and be lay. I am a thing finder. And when you're a thing finder, you don't have a minute to spare." "What did you say you are?" asked Annika. "A thing finder? What's that?" said Tommy. "Somebody who hunts for things naturally. What else could it be?" said Pippi, as she swept all the flour left on the floor into a little pile. "The whole world is full of things, and somebody has to look for them. And that is what a thing finder does," she finished. "What kind of things?" asked Annika. "Oh, all kinds," said Pippi. "Lumps of gold, ostrich feathers, dead rats, candy snap crackers, little tiny screws, things like that." Tommy and Annika thought it sounded as if it would be fun and wanted very much to be thing finders too, although Tommy did say he hoped he'd find a lump of gold and not a little tiny screw. "We shall see what we shall see," said Pippi. "One always finds something, but we've got to hurry up and get going so that other thing finders don't pick up all the lumps of gold around here before we get to them. All three thing finders are All three thing finders now set out. They decided that it would be best to begin hunting around the houses in the neighborhood, because Pippi said that although it could perfectly well happen that one might find a little screw deep in the woods, still the very best things were usually found where people were living. Though for that matter, she said, I've seen it the other way around too. I remember once when I was out hunting for things in the jungles of Borneo. Right in the heart of the forest, where no human being had ever before set foot. What do you suppose I found? Why, a very fine wooden leg. I gave it away later to a one-legged man, and he said that a wooden leg like that wasn't to be had for love or money. It means it was priceless. Tommy and Annika looked at Pippi to see just how a thing finder acted. Pippi ran from one side of the road to the other, shaded her eyes with her hand, and hunted and hunted. Sometimes she crawled around on her hands and knees, stuck her hands in between the pickets of a fence, and then said in a disappointed tone, "Oh dear, I was sure I saw a lump of gold." "May we really take everything we find?" asked Annika. "Yes, everything that is lying on the ground," said Pippi. Presently, they came to an old man asleep on the lawn outside of his cottage. "There," said Pippi. "That man is lying on the ground, and we have found him. We'll take him." Pippi and Annika were utterly horrified. "No, no, Pippi, we can't take an old gentleman. We couldn't possibly," said Tommy. "Anyway, whatever would we do with him?" "What would we do with him? Oh, there are plenty of things we could do with him. We could keep him in a little rabbit hutch instead of a rabbit and feed him on dandelions. But if you don't want to, I don't care. Though it does bother me to think that some other thing finder may come along and grab him." They went on. Suddenly, Pippi gave a terrific yell. "Ah! Well, I never saw the like," she cried, as she picked up a large, rusty old tin can from the grass. "What a find! What a find! Gang, that's something you can truly never have too many of." Tommy looked at the can doubtfully. "What can you use it for?" "Oh, you can use it in all sorts of ways," said Pippi. "One way is to put cookies in it. Then it becomes a delightful jar with cookies. Another way is to put cookies in it. Then it becomes... Oh, rewind. Another way is to not put cookies in it. Then it becomes a jar without cookies. That certainly isn't quite so delightful, but it's also good too." She examined the can, which was indeed rusty and had a hole in the bottom. "It looks almost as if this were a jar without cookies," she said thoughtfully. "But you can put it over your head and pretend that it is midnight." And that is just what she did. With the can over her head, she wandered around the block like a little metal tower, and never stopped until she stumbled over a low wire fence and fell flat on her stomach. There was a big crash when the tin can hit the ground. "Now see that?" said Pippi, and took off the can. "If I hadn't had this thing on me, I'd have fallen flat on my face and hurt myself terribly." "Yes," said Annika, "but if you hadn't had the can on your head, then you wouldn't have tripped over the wire fence in the first place." Before she had finished speaking, there was another triumphant cry from Pippi, "Ah!" who was holding up an empty spool of thread. "This seems to be my lucky day," she said. "Such a sweet, sweet little spool to blow soap bubbles with, or to hang around my neck for a necklace. I'll go home and make one this very minute." However, just at that moment, the gate of one of the cottages nearby opened and a boy came rushing out. He looked scared, and that was no wonder, because head over heels after him came 5 other boys. They soon caught him and pushed him against the fence, and all 5 began to punch and hit him. He cried and held his arms in front of his face to protect himself. "Give it to him! Give it to him!" cried the oldest and strongest of the boys, "so that he'll never dare to show himself on the street again." "Oh," said Annika, it's Willie they're hurting. Oh, how can they be so mean?" It's that awful Bent. His name is Bengt. Sounds awful. Bengt. It's that awful Bengt. He's always in a fight," said Tommy. And five against 1. What cowards." Pippi went up to the boys and tapped Bengt on the back with her forefinger. "Hello there," she said. "What's the idea? Are you trying to make hash out of little Willie with all 5 of you jumping on him at once? Binkt turned around and saw a little girl he had never seen before, a wild-looking stranger who dared to touch him. For a while he stood and gaped at her in astonishment. And then a broad grin spread over his face. "Boys," he said, "boys, let Willie alone and take a look at this girl. What a babe." He slapped his knees and laughed, and in an instant they had all docked around Pippi. All except Willie, who wiped away his tears and walked cautiously over to stand beside Tommy. "Have you ever seen red hair like hers? Red as fire, and such shoes," Binkt continued. "Can I borrow one? I'd like to go out rowing and I haven't any boat." He took a hold of one of Pippi's braids, but dropped it instantly and cried, "Ouch, I burned myself." Because Pippi's shoes are so big, he's calling them a boat. Because her hair is red, he's saying that it's hot. He's a bully. We don't like Binkt. Then all 5 boys joined hands around Pippi, jumping up and down and screaming, "Redhead, redhead." Pippi stood in the middle of the ring and smiled in the friendliest way. Binkt had hoped that she would get mad and begin to cry. At least she ought to have looked scared. When nothing happened, he gave her a push. "I don't think you have a very nice way with ladies," said Pippi, and she lifted him in her strong arms, high in the air, and carried him to a birch tree and hung him over a branch. Then she took the next boy and hung him over another branch. The next she set on a gatepost outside a cottage, and the next she threw right over a fence so that he landed in a flower bed. The last of the fighters she put in a tiny toy cart that stood by the road. Then Pippi, Tommy, Annika, and Willie stood and looked at the boys for a while. The boys were absolutely speechless with fright. And Pippi said, "You were cowards. 5 of you attacking one boy. That's cowardly. Then you begin to push a little helpless girl around. Oh, how mean!" "Come now, we'll go home," she said to Tommy and Annika, and to Willie. "If they ever try to hurt you again, you come and tell me." And to Binkt, who sat up in the tree and didn't dare to move, she said, "Is there anything else you have to say about my hair or my shoes? If so, you'd better say it now before I go home." But Binkt had nothing more to say about Pippi's shoes or her hair either. So Pippi took her can in one hand and her spool in the other and went away, followed by Tommy and Annika. When they were back home in Pippi's garden, Pippi said, "Dear me, how awful! Here I found 2 beautiful things and you didn't get anything. You must hunt a little more. Tommy, why don't you go look in that old hollow tree? Old trees are usually the best places of all for thing finders." Tommy said he didn't believe that he and Annika would ever find anything, but to please Pippi, he put his hand slowly down into the hollow tree trunk. "Goodness!" he cried, utterly amazed, and pulled out his hand. In it he held a little notebook with a leather cover. In a special loop, there was a little silver pencil. "Well, that's odd," said Tommy. "Now see that?" said Pippi. "There's nothing so nice as being a thing finder. It's a wonder there aren't more people that take it up. There'll be tailors and shoemakers and chimney sweeps and such like, but thing finders, no indeed. That isn't good enough for them." Then she said to Annika, "Why don't you fill in that old tree stump? One practically always finds things in old tree stumps." Annika stuck her hand down into the stump, and almost immediately got hold of a red coral necklace. She and Tommy stood open-mouthed for a long time. They were so astonished, and they thought hereafter they would be thing finders every single day. Pippi had been up half the night before, playing ball, and now she suddenly felt sleepy. "I think I'll go and take a nap," she said. "Can't you come with me and tuck me in?" When Pippi was sitting on the edge of the bed, taking off her shoes, she looked at them thoughtfully and said, "He was going out rowing," he said, "that old Binkt." She snorted disdainfully. "I'll teach him to row, indeed I will, another time," because Binkt said he was going to go out in his boat and row. "Say, Pippi," Tommy said respectfully, "why do you wear such big shoes?" "So I can wiggle my toes, of course," she answered. Then she crept into bed. She always slept with her feet on the pillow and her head way down under the quilt. That's the way they sleep in Guatemala, she announced. And it's the only real way to sleep. See, like this, I can wiggle my toes when I'm sleeping too. Can you go to sleep without a lullaby? She went on. I always have to sing to myself for a while. Otherwise, I can't sleep a wink. Tommy and Annika heard a humming sound underneath the quilt. It was Pippi singing herself to sleep. Quietly and cautiously, they tiptoed out so that they would not disturb her. In the doorway, they turned to take a last look toward the bed. They could see nothing of Pippi except her feet resting on the pillow. There she lay, wiggling her toes emphatically. Tommy and Annika ran home. Annika held her coral necklace tightly in her hand. That certainly was strange, she said. Tommy, you don't suppose, do you, that Pippi had put those things in place beforehand, do you? You can never tell, said Tommy. You just can never tell about anything when it comes to Pippi. And we will find out what happens next to Pippi and Tommy and Annika and all their adventures next time on Storytime with Uncle Scotty. I have been your host, Uncle Scotty. We have our own mugs. Thank you for listening along and watching and checking us out and sharing, liking, all those things. Makes me so happy and so lucky and feel so fortunate. And I hope that you will get some inspiration from Pippi. Maybe be a thing finder yourself, since we are maybe having to stay around our homes and around small spaces. Maybe we're finding little new things and doing new things with them. And how fun is that? To discover what many things a mug can be. It can be a microphone, it can be a telephone, it can be a seashell, it could be a place for water or tea. It could be a drum, it could be a thing to put pencils in, cookies in, all kinds of things. That's just in a few seconds. So maybe you can be a thing finder too. Okay, that's it. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye.